My cousin joked my son was the mistake. She went pale when I made her remember her own accident. He asked me in the car on the way home from the christening at about 9:30 at night, out of the dark of the back seat, "Ma'am, what's a mistake?" I said it's when you get something wrong, like a spelling. And Kai said, "No, but what's the mistake?" I have gone over the next 4 seconds more than any other 4 seconds of my life because I had a choice in them and I got it wrong. What I said was, "It's just a silly thing Auntie Ott says. It doesn't mean anything, love." And my son, who is 8, said, "Okay," in the voice he uses when he has decided not to ask a second time, and then looked out of the window for the rest of the way home. He'd been hearing it since he was 4. That's what I could not get past that night, lying in bed at 12:30. 4 years of that word going over his head in the way words do. And then somewhere between 7 and 8, the top of his head came up to meet it. I had Kai at 19. I'll do the whole thing quickly because it's the least interesting part of this. I was 19. I'd been with a lad called Fion's brother for about 7 months. I found out in the March. He was gone by the July. He sends 50 pounds at Christmas and has met his son twice. And my family were, on the whole, good about it. I want that in early and I want it in properly because it is the exact reason the joke was impossible to fight. Nobody threw me out. Nobody made a speech. My mother cried for about a day and then took me to the appointment. My auntie Nia gave me a cot and a Moses basket and about 400 quid of stuff and would not take a penny. And my father, who I'm going to be talking about a lot, retiled a bathroom in a flat that wasn't ours so that the landlord would let me have it with a baby. That's my family. They are loud and they are nosy and they are, when it counts, completely solid. Which is why for 9 years I have felt like I owed them. And that is the whole mechanism of everything that follows. I want to be precise about the debt because they were good to me is not enough to explain 9 years of not saying anything. It's a running account. Nobody has ever presented it. Nobody has ever said the words. But everybody in that family knows the figures. Auntie Nia's 400 quid of baby stuff, my Uncle Gwillem's van 3 times for moving, Ott's having him for that weekend when I had shingles, which she did without being asked and which I could not have managed without. And underneath all of it, the big one, the one that never gets mentioned and never needs to be. Nobody made you feel bad about it. That's the account. 9 years of small kindnesses, all real, all freely given, and every single one of them making it very slightly harder to say, actually, could you not? There is no version of complaining about the joke that does not sound to a family who gave you a cot, like a girl who was helped and then got picky about the tone. I knew that. I have known it since about 2022, and I want to be clear that nobody in my family did that on purpose. They were just kind to me, and I turned their kindness into a bill and then paid it with my silence for 9 years. That's mine. That one's genuinely mine. Otts is my cousin, and she is 5 years older than me, and she did everything in order. Degree, then the job in Cardiff, then the flat with Reese, then the house, then married at 28, then Nell at 30, and Bran at 32. In order. That's how it gets said in my family. Otts has done it all in order, hasn't she? And it has always been said admiringly, and it has always been said in a room I was standing in. She started it when Kai was about 4. I remember the first time because it was funny. Genuinely, I laughed. We were at a barbecue and somebody's new girlfriend was doing the round of names, and Otts pointed at Kai with a bottle and said, "And that one's Kai. He's the mistake." And everybody laughed, including me, because Kai was 4 and was at that moment eating a fistful of coleslaw off the floor, and because it was 2021 and I was 23, and I had spent 4 years being extremely careful not to be the person who couldn't take a joke. That's how it started. That is exactly how it started. And if you had asked me at that barbecue whether it was cruel, I would have said no, honestly and confidently, and I would have meant it. Here's what it turned into over 4 years, and I want to lay it out properly, because on paper it looks like nothing. It became his introduction. Not every time. That's the thing. Maybe one time in 4, and always to somebody new, and always with warmth, and always with a laugh at the end of it. Otts genuinely loves that boy. She buys him better presents than I can afford. She had him for a weekend when I had shingles. But when there was a new person, the joke came out. Because it's a good joke and it gets a laugh, and it is, and I did not understand this for years, a very efficient way of explaining our whole family to a stranger in 6 words. This is Cyanid. That's her boy. He's the mistake. Done. New person now knows. Young mother. No dad about. Family absorbed it. We're all fine about it. Isn't it funny? And it does one more thing, which took me until I was 27 to see. It puts me at 19. Every single time. I noticed it properly at a wedding in 2023. There was a woman on my table about my age, and we'd been getting on, proper conversation, work, a shared opinion about somebody's shoes, for about 40 minutes. And then Otts came past and did the introduction to the couple next to us. And this woman heard it, and I watched her adjust. Nothing rude. She didn't recoil. She just repositioned, very slightly, the way people do when a new fact arrives. And for the rest of that reception, she was warmer with me, which is somehow worse. She asked about childcare. She said twice that she didn't know how I did it. 40 minutes of being a person, and then 6 words, and then 2 hours of being managed kindly by a stranger. Whatever else has happened in my life, the qualification, the job I like, the flat that's actually mine now, the introduction resets me to a girl who got it wrong, and it resets Otts to the one who did it in order. And it does that in a warm voice at a barbecue in front of people I've never met. Whatever else has happened in my life, the qualification, the job I like, the flat that's actually actually mine now. The introduction resets me to a girl who got it wrong, and it resets Otts to the one who did it in order. And it does that in a warm voice at a barbecue in front of people I've never met. 4 years of that, maybe 40 times. I went to her about it on a Tuesday at her house, on my own, without Kai. I had it worked out. I was not going to be dramatic. I said it kindly. I said, Otts, would you mind not doing the mistake thing about Kai anymore? He's getting old enough to hear it. And my cousin was, and I want to be fair to her, genuinely surprised. Not defensive at first, actually surprised. She said, oh God, Sio, it's a joke. He loves it. I said, I don't think he does anymore. She said, he does. He laughs. And I said, that's what I mean. She didn't understand that at all, and I could not make her. She said something about how she'd never say it in a mean way, which is true, and something about how she adores him, which is also true. And then she said the sentence that ended it, and she said it gently, which made it worse. She said, you've never minded before. And I sat in her kitchen and could not answer that because it is completely factually correct. 4 years, 40 times. I laughed at about 30 of them. I tried once more before I left. I said, it's different now, he understands it. And Ott said, Sio, he's 8. He thinks it means he was a surprise. Kids love being a surprise, which is a good answer. It's a really good answer. And for about 4 days, I thought she might be right. I actually went home and half talked myself out of the whole thing on the strength of it. What I did not say, because I did not have the words for it until about 6 months later, is that's the version he'll have until he's 11. At 11, he'll work out what it actually means. And when he does, he won't work it out in a kitchen with me, carefully, at a time I've chosen. He'll work it out in a room full of laughing adults, retroactively, about 40 times at once. Every one of those 40 laughs is sitting there waiting for him to be old enough to understand it, and they will all land in the same afternoon. That's what I was trying to stop, and I could not find a way to say it that didn't sound insane. So I tried the family, which took about 5 weeks and which I now understand was never going to work. And I want to describe why, because it's the actual anatomy of this thing. I went to Auntie Nia first, because she's Otts' mother, and because she is the one everybody listens to. She was lovely about it. She said Otts doesn't mean anything by it. She said we're a family that takes the mick, and it's a sign of affection. She said, and I have thought about this for 2 years. We all just say it, love. It's not from anywhere. It's not from anywhere. That's the bit. That's the whole thing in 5 words, and she had no idea what she was telling me. It genuinely wasn't from anywhere anymore. It had detached from Otts. 41 people in that family said it, at Christmases, at Sunday things. My uncle said it, my own mother said it once and apologized for a week, and not one of them had ever made a decision to. They'd absorbed it, the way you absorb a family's word for the downstairs toilet. You cannot argue with a word that isn't from anywhere. There's nobody to take it up with. I want to describe what happened in that conversation with Auntie Nia after that, because it is the single most useful 90 seconds of my life, and she had no idea she was giving it to me. I said, but it started somewhere. Ott started it, at the barbecue. And my auntie waved her hand, the bad one, the one with the plate in it, which she does without thinking, and said, oh, we've all been saying that for years. I said it's 4 years. And she said, is it? Feels like forever. Feels like forever. That's what a family word does. 4 years, and it had already eaten its own beginning. She could not locate the start of it, and she was standing 4 feet from the woman who'd said it first. And I looked at her hand while she said it. At the wrist, she cannot turn all the way over, 9 years on, and I thought entirely clearly, and for the first time, you've done this before. Not maliciously, not as a plot. My Auntie Nia is a woman who has twice in her life been in a room where something needed a name, and both times she found one fast and warm and everybody took it. She's good at it. She's the best in that family at it, and I do not think she has ever once known she was doing it. I asked 6 people individually to stop. 6. One at a time, politely, in kitchens. And it worked for about 3 weeks. And then it came back, because that is what vocabulary does. You can get people to remember for a fortnight, and then somebody's had 2 glasses, and there's a new person at the table, and the sentence is just there, sitting in the mouth, ready. Then, in the January, it changed. And this is the part where I stopped being able to leave it alone. We were at my mother's. There was a woman there, a friend of my mam's from the choir, never met her, and she said hello to Kai and asked him his name. And my son, 8 years old, said, I'm Kai, I'm the mistake, and did the little laugh. He got there first. He said it before Otts could, with the timing already on it, because he'd heard it done 40 times and he knew where the laugh went. And the woman from the choir laughed, because what else do you do? And Kai looked pleased, and I stood in my mother's kitchen holding a plate of Welsh cakes. Then she said, kindly, in the way people do, oh, I'm sure you're not. And my son said, no, I am. It's a family joke. It's a family joke. 8 years old explaining the mechanism correctly to a stranger. He'd even got the register right, the little shrug that says, don't worry, we're all fine about this. I put the Welsh cakes down and went upstairs to the bathroom for about 4 minutes, because I knew exactly what I was watching. I have been doing it myself since I was 19. You get in first. You make the joke about yourself before the room can, because a joke you tell is a joke you're in on, and a joke told about you is something else entirely. I have done it at every family thing for 9 years. Oh, you know me, I did it all backwards. And I have been proud of being good-natured about it, and what I was actually doing was volunteering. He'd learned it off me, not off Otts, off me. He'd watched his mother do it 100 times. That was the night I stopped trying to be reasonable about it. I went and stood in my mother's back garden in January with no coat on for about 10 minutes, and I did an inventory of myself that I had been putting off for 9 years. Oh, I did it all backwards. I say that. I have said it at every family thing since I was 20. Well, I'm not the clever one. I say that too. At my own qualification, when I got my dental nursing registration at 24, which took 3 years of night classes with a toddler, I stood in my auntie's kitchen and somebody said, "Well done." And I said, "Yeah, only took me till 24, mind." Only took me till 24, mind? Nobody made me say that. There was no cousin standing there. I did it to myself in a kitchen at the exact moment I was being congratulated, because getting in first is a reflex, and I have had it for 9 years, and my son had been watching. That's the thing that got me out into that garden, not Otts. Otts is a woman who says a thing at barbecues. I had been running a live demonstration in front of a child for 8 years of how you volunteer to be the joke, and he had learned it perfectly, and he was better at the timing than I am. The word accident has been in my family since August 2016, and until the 60th, I had never heard anybody examine it. Here's what happened. Otts was 23. There'd been a party at my uncle's for something, an anniversary, I think. She drove her mother home at about 11 at night and put the car into the wall of the bridge on the Fennel Lane Bend at about 15 miles an hour. Auntie Nia broke her wrist in 2 places, scaphoid and something else. She had a plate put in, and she still can't turn her hand all the way over. Otts had had 2 drinks. I know that because I was at that party and I watched her have them, and because at 19 and 5 months pregnant and on lemonade all night you notice who's drinking. She was not tested. Nobody was tested. And the reason nobody was tested is that my father got there before the ambulance. He lived 400 yards up the lane. Somebody rang him because he was closest. And Dad, who had been a driving instructor for 31 years and who knew exactly what he was looking at, moved the car off the bend and onto the verge, and by the time anybody official arrived, it was a woman with a broken wrist and a car on a verge and a family standing round. I was there for the aftermath, not the crash. My ma'am drove me down because Auntie Nia had asked for her. And I want to put down what I actually saw, because it is the only reason I understand what a family word is and where it comes from. There were 9 of us on that verge by the time the ambulance came. My dad, my ma'am, my uncle Gwillem, Otts's husband Reese, 2 of the neighbors, me, and Otts sitting on the wall with her hands between her knees, not saying anything at all. And Auntie Nia was on the ground with her wrist held against her chest, in a lot of pain, and she was talking. She was saying over and over, "She's all right, don't fuss her." Her wrist was in 2 pieces, and she was managing the room. And somebody, I have never been able to remember who, and I have tried for 9 years, and I think it was one of the neighbors, which almost makes it worse, said, "Terrible accident." And my auntie said, It was a terrible accident, twice in about 4 seconds, before anybody in a uniform had arrived, and within about 20 minutes the word had arrived properly. Otts has had an accident. 9 years, 41 people. Every single one of them knows there was a party. Not one has ever said a single word about it, ever, in my hearing, and there has never been a reason to, because there is a word for it, and the word is accident, and it is a kind word, and everybody agreed. But that's the bit everybody knows. Here's the bit I know, and until the 60th, I was the only living person who did. 11 days after the crash, I was at the hospital with Auntie Nia, because she was having the plate put in, and my ma'am was working, and somebody had to sit with her. 19, 6 months gone, in a plastic chair in a corridor outside the day surgery unit. And Auntie Nia and my dad went out into the corridor to talk, and they did not go far enough, and they thought I was asleep. She asked him to say he'd been driving, not aggressively, not as a demand. She was crying, and she said something about Otts's job. Otts had just started at the firm in Cardiff, and there was something about a company car and a policy. And she said, "Ken, would you say it was you?" And my father said, "No, that's it. That's all he said, not a speech. He didn't say, 'How dare you?' And he didn't say, 'I understand,' but he said no, and then after a bit he said, 'I'll not lie about a car, Nia.' And then they came back in, and my auntie held my hand while she waited to go down, and my dad went and got 3 teas, and nobody has mentioned it from that day to this. He never told my mother. I know that because I asked her after, and she nearly dropped a mug. He never told anybody. He was asked to lie by his own sister in a hospital corridor, and he said no, and then he carried it on his own for 5 years and died in 2021 without one single person in that family knowing he'd been asked. And I need to say what I did with it, because I am not the hero of this bit either. I was 19. I went home from that hospital, and I did not say anything to my ma'am, and by about the 3rd day, I had decided it was not my business, and by the end of that year, I had put it somewhere in the back and mostly stopped taking it out. 9 years. I sat at Christmases with my auntie Nia. I let her buy Kai his school shoes twice. I sent her flowers when her mother died. And the reason I never said anything is not loyalty, and it is not discretion. It is that I was 19 and pregnant and living in a family's goodwill, and a girl in that position does not go round the houses saying she overheard something in a corridor. By the time I was old enough that I could have 25, 26, it had been so long that saying it would have been an act of aggression rather than information. So I understood the mechanism of that family's silence perfectly well from the inside for 9 years, because I was one of the people doing it. The only difference between me and everybody else in that function room is that I knew what I was keeping quiet about. They just had a word. There is one more thing about my father, and it's the bit I can't put down. He never once used the joke. Not one time in 4 years, and he was there for the first one at the barbecue. And he was a man who took the mick out of everybody and everything. I noticed it at the time, vaguely. vaguely, the way you notice weather. I thought he was being soft with me. He wasn't being soft. He'd already had a conversation in a corridor about what this family does with words. He knew exactly what he was looking at when Otz said it that first time, and he did the only thing he had left, which was not to join in. 4 years of that, every barbecue. And he never told me why either. And the reason the word accident stuck so hard, so completely for so long, the reason 41 people never once poked it, is that it was the compromise. Nobody would lie. So instead, everybody agreed on a word that meant nobody had to. The 60th was my Uncle Gwilym's at the rugby club. 41 people in the march. I did not go there planning it. I want to be honest because people always assume there was a plan, and there wasn't one. I'd have been sick with nerves for a week if there'd been a plan. What I had instead was 2 months of an idea I kept putting down. It arrived in the January, in my mother's garden, in about the 11th minute of standing out there with no coat. And it did not arrive as a plan. It arrived as an observation, and the observation was this. They've done this twice. The same family, the same room, the same move. Something happens that would be difficult to look at, and within about 4 seconds, somebody supplies a word, and everybody takes it, and then the word does the work forever. Accident. Mistake. Both of them warm, both of them kind, in intent. Both of them a way of putting something down without carrying it. And only one of them was allowed to be examined, because one was about a woman who'd done everything in order, and one was about a girl who hadn't. I did not do anything with that for 2 months. I want to be clear. I had it in my head from the January, and I turned it over probably 100 times, at work, in the car, at 3 in the morning, and every single time I got to the same wall, which is, and then what? Because saying it does nothing. Nobody goes to prison. Nobody's hand gets fixed. My father is still dead. I could not find a single practical outcome that made it worth blowing up a family for, and so I did nothing with it for 8 weeks. And then a woman said 6 words to 2 strangers with her hand on my son's shoulder, and I found out that I was going to say it whether I'd decided to or not. What there was a room and a buffet, and Otz 3 drinks in and in a very good mood, and a couple who'd moved in next door to my uncle and had come along, and she did it. Hand on Kai's shoulder, bottle in the other hand, to 2 people who had never met him. And this one's Kai, he's the mistake. And the 2 neighbors laughed, and Kai laughed, and my son looked up at her with his face doing the thing it does, which is being pleased to be included. I put my glass down. I did not shout. I want that on the record because there are versions going round in which I made a scene. And the truth is, I have never spoken more quietly in my life. I said, he's not a mistake, Otz. He's a boy. And she started to say something with a laugh in it, and I said, your car was an accident. And the room did not go quiet yet. It went quiet about a second and a half later. When everybody's brain caught up, you could watch it happen in waves across that function room, table by table, 41 people arriving one after another at a word they had all been using since 2016. Then I said the only other thing I said all night. That's the word we use when we've decided not to look at something, isn't it? Otz had gone the color of the tablecloth. Auntie Nia was standing by the buffet with a plate. And into that silence, and I did not decide to do this, it came out of me, and I have never worked out whether I'm glad. I said, Auntie Nia asked my dad to say he was driving. 11 days after. In the corridor outside day surgery at the Heath. Somebody said, cyanide. He said no. He said, I'll not lie about a car. I picked my glass back up because my hand needed something. And then he never told a single one of you for 5 years, so that none of you would have to be angry at each other. Auntie Nia put the plate down on the table without looking at it, and my Uncle Gwilym, whose 60th it was, sat down. That was it. Nobody argued. There was no row. That's the thing people find hardest to believe. 41 people stood in a function room, and nobody said anything for about 8 seconds. And then somebody put music on, and about a third of them left within half an hour. 2 things happened in that 8 seconds that I have not been able to stop thinking about. The first is that my mother, who was standing by the door with a coat over her arm, did not look at me. She looked at Auntie Nia, straight at her immediately before anybody else had moved, which told me that my ma'am had spent 9 years knowing there was something without knowing what and had just found out. She told me afterward in the car that Dad had come home from that hospital and sat in the kitchen with his coat still on for about 20 minutes, and then said he was going to bed. She'd asked him what was wrong. He'd said, nothing, love, long day. The second thing is Kai. He was standing right there, 8 years old, holding a plate of sausage rolls in the middle of it, and he did not understand one single word of what was happening. I have checked carefully in the 2 years since in about 4 separate conversations, and he genuinely doesn't. To him, that evening is, Ma'am said something to Auntie Otz, and everyone went quiet, and then we went home early. But when I stopped talking, he came over and stood next to me, not because he understood, because I was on my own in the middle of a room, and he's 8, and that's what he does. I put my hand on the back of his head, and we stood there while somebody put the music on. Nothing happened. Legally, I mean, obviously. It was 2016. There was never a test. My father is dead, and the only witness to the corridor is a woman who was 19 and pregnant and half asleep in a plastic chair. I did not do it to get anybody in trouble, and there was never any trouble available to get anybody into. There was one consequence, and it wasn't one I'd thought about at all. Auntie Nia went to see a solicitor. Not about me, about herself. She found out 5 weeks later, sitting in an office in Bridgend, that there had never been anything to be frightened of. There was no offense anybody could have charged in 2016 on the basis of 2 drinks 9 years ago ago with no test and no witness statement. Otz's job would have been fine. The company car policy she'd been so frightened about turned out to require a conviction, and there was never going to be one. 9 years of a word, and a wrist that doesn't turn, and a man who died carrying a corridor conversation over nothing. Over a thing she was frightened of at 11 o'clock at night on a verge, which was never actually going to happen, and which nobody ever checked, because once there's a word, you stop asking questions about the thing the word is covering. My mother told me that. Auntie Nia has never spoken to me since, and has told several people that I did what I did to punish her, and she may be right about part of that, and I have stopped arguing about it. What changed otherwise was the vocabulary, and I want to be honest about how small that sounds, and how much it turned out to matter. Nobody has said the mistake since that night. Not once. Not at Christmas, not at the 2 funerals we've had since, not by anybody, ever. And nobody says the accident either. It took about a year, and now it's Otz's crash, which is ugly and accurate, and which somebody says about twice a year without thinking about it. 2 words. That's the entire yield of 9 years and 1 evening. I want to say honestly how that has sat with me, because at the time I thought it was nothing. For about 6 months afterward, I genuinely believed I had traded an auntie, a cousin, and a third of a family for a change in phrasing, and that I had made a catastrophic deal. What changed my mind was a Sunday in the November at my mother's, when my uncle Gwillem was telling somebody about a car he was thinking of buying, and he said, "Not another one of those. Otz wrote one of them off on the Fennel Bend, wrote one off on the bend, as a fact about a car." And nobody in that kitchen so much as blinked, and Otz wasn't there, and nobody was being got at, and it was simply, for the first time in 9 years, a thing that had happened, described in the words for the thing that had happened. It cost what it cost. But my son is going to grow up in a family that says what things are, and I did not grow up in one. And that turns out to be the whole of it. That's what I got. 2 words changed in a family of 41 people, and it cost me my Auntie Nia, who has not spoken to me since and will not, and Otz, who did not speak to me for 14 months. She spoke to me at my uncle's wife's funeral in the June. She came and stood next to me by the tea urn and said, "I never once thought about it as being about you," which is the closest thing to an apology I am going to get, and which is, I think, entirely true, and which is precisely the problem. We had about 4 minutes by that urn, and I'm going to put the rest of it down because it's the only honest conversation the 2 of us have ever had. I said, "Who did you think it was about?" And she said, "Him. It was about him. He was this little tank of a thing, and he was into everything, and it was," she did a hand gesture, "it was fond." I said, "It was about me, Otz, every time." And she said, "It wasn't meant to be." And then she said the thing that I actually believe is the truth about my cousin, and she said it looking at a tea urn. She said, "Co, you had a baby at 19, and everyone rallied round, and it was the biggest thing that happened in this family for about a decade, and I did everything right, and nobody's ever thrown me a thing." She said, "That's not your fault. I know that's not your fault." I said, "So the joke was about that." And Otz said, "I don't know, probably. I've had a year of thinking about it, and I still don't know," which is, I have decided, more honest than an apology would have been. We are civil now, not close. She sends Kai a birthday thing, and I say thanks. And at family occasions, we talk about her kids for 4 minutes, and neither of us has ever mentioned the function room again. About a third of that family think I ruined a 60th. I've heard it twice, secondhand. There is a version out there where I have a chip on my shoulder and I waited 9 years and I picked a party. I have stopped trying to correct it. Kai is 9 now. He got introduced at Christmas by my uncle to somebody from the club. And this is Cyanede's boy, Kai. He's a demon on that bike. And Kai said hiya and went back to what he was doing and did not add anything. He didn't notice. That's the whole point. He has no idea any of this happened, and he is not going to, from me, until he's about 25. But in the car on the way home, he asked me if we could go and see Bampy's bench, which is a bench by the rugby pitch with my father's name on it that the club put in. We went the next Saturday. It was freezing. And he sat on it with his hands in his sleeves and said, "What was Bampy like?" And I said, "He was somebody who wouldn't say a thing that wasn't true, even when it would have been easier." And Kai said, "Was he in trouble a lot then?" And I said, "No, love, not once."